The Texans' boots hit the red Georgia clay at full sprint. 400 screaming men in butternut gray, bayonets glinting in the October dawn, charging straight at 52 soldiers in blue. Captain John Alexander Smith, 20 years old, barely old enough to grow a proper beard, gripped something the rebels had never seen before. Not a single-shot musket, not even a 7-shot Spencer, a Henry repeating rifle, 16 rounds, no reloading. The Confederates couldn't understand what they were seeing. 52 men walking forward in the open, not running, not taking cover, walking straight toward 400 enemy soldiers like they owned the morning. What happened in the next 5 minutes would rewrite the mathematics of warfare itself and leave a Texas regiment shattered into fragments, wondering how the laws of combat had suddenly changed. October 5th, 1864, Allatoona Pass, Georgia. This is the story of the weapon that made one Federal soldier worth 8 Confederates, and the desperate men who bet their lives on 16 rounds of rimfire ammunition. Let me take you back 6 hours. It's just past midnight when the train screeches to a halt at Allatoona Pass. Brigadier General John Corse, 24 years old, youngest general in Sherman's army, steps down onto the platform and immediately knows they're in trouble. The pass itself cuts through the Allatoona Mountains like a knife wound, 300 feet long, 175 feet deep. 4 roads converge here. The Western and Atlantic Railroad threads through, and stacked in warehouses along this choke point, over 1 million rations, 8,000 head of beef cattle, $3 million worth of Union supplies, everything. General William Tecumseh Sherman needs to keep his army fed as it drives towards Savannah and the sea. General Corse's intelligence officer hands him the latest dispatch. Major General Samuel French is moving this way with an entire Confederate division, maybe 3,500 men, maybe more. Artillery, experienced troops from Lieutenant General John Bell Hood's Army of Tennessee, the same army that fought Sherman tooth and nail from Chattanooga to Atlanta. Corse counts as reinforcements 291 men from the 7th Illinois, 267 from the 39th Iowa, parts of 3 other regiments. With the existing garrison, he's got maybe 2,000 defenders, outnumbered nearly 2 to 1. But here's what the Confederates don't know. Those 291 boys from Illinois, they're carrying something special. Each man spent $52.50, nearly 4 months' pay, to purchase what one Union officer called the most effective weapon in service. The Henry repeating rifle, liver action, tubular magazine loaded through the front, 15 rounds in the magazines, 1 in the chamber, fire, eject, chamber, fire again. A trained soldier could empty all 16 rounds in less than 15 seconds. Confederates, they're carrying Enfield rifle muskets, single-shot muzzle loading, ram powder, ram ball, cap the nipple, aim, fire, reload. A good soldier might get 3 shots. Do the math. In the time it takes a Confederate soldier to load and fire 3 rounds, a man with a Henry can put 48 bullets downrange. But mathematics doesn't win battles. Men do. And right now, in the pre-dawn darkness of October 5th, 1864, General Corse is deploying his men across the defensive perimeter. They barely have enough bodies to hold. 6:30 in the morning, the sun's burning off when the first Confederate shells start screaming over. Major General French has positioned his artillery on Moore's Hill, overlooking the entire Federal position. Napoleon's smoothbore cannons, 12-pounder, start hammering the Union earthworks. The 12th Wisconsin Battery answers back, and suddenly the air over Allatoona Pass is filled with shrieking iron. But French isn't here for an artillery duel. He's here to seize those supplies, burn the railroad trestle over the Etowah River that filled this entire railroad, cut with dirt, logs, brush, anything to strangle Sherman's supply line. At 8:30 a.m., a bizarre procession emerges from the Confederate lines, a flag of truce, and holding it, a black servant with a handkerchief stenciled with the words, "A coward," name perhaps of a Confederate officer, but the irony isn't lost on anyone watching. Major David Sanders, French's adjutant, hands Lieutenant William Kinney of the 93rd Illinois a folded paper. The message travels up the chain. Colonel Richard Rewrote to General Corse. The words are polite, almost cordial. When I have placed the forces under my command in such position that you are surrounded, and to avoid a needless effusion of blood, I call upon you to surrender your forces at once and unconditionally. General Corse, wounded twice already in this war, once at Vicksburg, once at Missionary Ridge, reads it twice, looks at his staff officers, and writes a reply that will become legend. Your communication demanding surrender of my command, I acknowledge receipt of, and would respectfully reply that we are prepared for the needless effusion of blood whenever it is agreeable to you. Translation, come and take it. Now here's what you need to understand. Corse isn't bluffing out of arrogance, he's buying time. Sherman's signalmen are wigwagging messages from Kennesaw Mountain, but 15 miles away. Help is coming. Maybe. If the Confederates move fast enough, or if French commits his full force before reinforcements arrive, Allatoona Pass could fall within hours. But Corse has one more card to play, and it's carried by Captain John Alexander Smith and his 291 men from the 7th Illinois, each one cradling a brass-framed Henry rifle with a 16-round magazine. The Confederates don't know it yet, but they're about to run headfirst into the future of warfare. 9 o'clock. The surrender offer has been rejected. French gives the order. From the west, Brigadier General Francis Cockrell's Missouri Brigade, 1,900 veterans, begins moving up the Cartersville Road toward the Federal lines. Behind them, Brigadier General William Young's Texas Brigade, another 400 men, forms up as a second wave. From the north, Brigadier General Claudius Sears' Mississippi Brigade pushes toward the railroad, trying to flank the entire Union position. The 7th Illinois and 39th Iowa are dug into rifle pits along the Cartersville Road. Behind them, the Star Fort, a 6-sided earthwork about 75 feet by 60 feet, bristling with artillery. If the Confederates break through these forward positions, they can sweep right into the supply depot. The Missourians hit first. Private Frank Orcutt of Company A, 7th Illinois, described what happened next in a letter home. Early in the forenoon, a demand came in for a surrender, followed immediately by an impetuous and headlong attack. Impetuous, headlong. Those are genteel words for what combat actually looks like. Imagine hundreds of men screaming the rebel yell, that high-pitched, wavering shriek that sounds like demons clawing out of the earth, charging across open ground through smoke and noise and confusion. The Federal skirmishers from Company 1, 7th Illinois, are overwhelmed almost immediately. Captain Jack Sullivan goes down, taken out in the first minutes. The men who aren't hit are captured. The Confederate line keeps coming. And then they hit the main defensive line. Ace, the regimental historian of the 7th Illinois, wrote, "The 7th Illinois and the 39th Iowa are standing like a wall of fire in the outer works. The storm breaks upon them in all its mad fury. The 7th is now struggling against the reckless rush of the infuriated rebels that are swarming towards their front. The 16 shooters are doing their work. The very air seems to grow faint as it breathes their lurid flame." Lurid flame. That's what a Henry rifle looks like in sustained fire. The lever blurs. Empty brass casings fountain into the air. Smoke pours from the octagonal barrel, and Confederate soldiers advancing at a run just stop, stumble, fall. Because here's the thing nobody prepared them for. A Union soldier with a Springfield musket fires, then disappears behind cover for 30 seconds to reload. You can rush him during that window. You can close the distance. It's dangerous. Men will fall, but with enough numbers, you can overrun the position. But a man with a Henry, he doesn't stop firing. The instant you see muzzle flash, he's already cycled the lever. Another shot, and another, and another. 16 times without pause. From the Confederate perspective, it must have seemed impossible. One man doing the work of 5, an entire company. 52 soldiers putting out the firepower of 260. Private Orcutt, that musician from Carlinville, Illinois, described his own experience. After fully 400 cartridges had been used, the writer had climbed over the top of the fort and was looking over the top of a 6-pounder cannon where a fellow in gray came up from a ravine and entered the cabin. 400 rounds. Think about that. In a few hours of combat, one soldier fired more ammunition than most Civil War soldiers would shoot in an entire year of campaigning. But the Confederates keep coming. Cockrell's Missourians, Young's Texans, they're not cowards, they're veterans. They've been through hell before, they know how to take casualties and keep moving. The problem is, they're taking casualties faster than they've ever seen. Let me freeze this moment, because this is where Captain John Alexander Smith makes a decision that shouldn't work, that violates every tactical principle taught at West Point. That should get him court-martialed if he survived. It's mid-morning now, the forward rifle pits are under crushing pressure. Sears' Mississippians have successfully flanked the 39th Iowa on the right. The line is starting to collapse. General Corse sees what's happening. If the 7th Illinois and 39th Iowa don't fall back to the Star Fort immediately, they'll be cut off and surrounded. But there's a problem. Young's Texas Brigade, 400 men, is making a direct push toward the supply depot. The warehouses full of rations. If they reach those buildings, if they torch them, the entire battle becomes meaningless, even if the Federals hold the fort. Someone needs to stop the Texans. Right now, Corse finds Captain Smith, 20 years old, Company E commander, 52 men. And he asks Smith a question that sounds insane. Can you hold off an entire Confederate regiment? 400 men versus 52. Any reasonable officer would say no. Request reinforcements. Fall back to a better position. Something. Captain Smith looks at his men, looks at the brass-framed Henrys slung over their shoulders. Does some mental arithmetic that only makes sense if you understand what 16 rounds of continuous fire really means. He says, "I can, sir." Then he slings his own Henry over his shoulder, turns to Company E, and says 4 words that will echo through military history. "Come on, boys." They move forward, in the open, not retreating, advancing toward 400 Confederates. The Texas soldiers see this, and they must think it's a mistake, some confused federal company stumbling into the wrong position. Because nobody advances 52 men against 400. It's not bravery. It's not even suicide. It's just impossible. Captain Smith marches his men until they're in line with the left flank of the Texas regiment. Perpendicular to their advance, every Company E soldier has a clear field of fire down the entire length of the Confederate formation. Smith gives the command by right into line. 52 rifles swing up simultaneously, and then chaos. Here's what happens when you multiply small numbers by 16. 52 men, 16 rounds each before reloading. That's 832 bullets before anyone needs to open their cartridge box. And a trained soldier with a Henry can dump all 16 rounds in 18 seconds. The Texans are advancing in a line formation, the standard infantry tactic of 1864. Men shoulder to shoulder, officers on horseback, flags flying. It's time to deliver maximum shock and firepower against firing single-shot muskets. Against Henrys, it's a massacre. The historical record is blunt. In 5 minutes, the rebel regiment was broken to fragments and practically annihilated. 5 minutes. Imagine you're a Texas soldier in that formation. You're running forward, screaming the rebel yell, closing distance. You see 52 Yankees ahead. You think, we've got this. We outnumber them 8-1. Then the firing starts, and it doesn't stop. The man next to you drops. The sergeant ahead of you crumples. The color bearer goes down. Someone picks up the flag. He falls too. You're running through smoke so thick you can barely see, and the noise is continuous. Not the crashing volleys you're used to, but one long, sustained roar like tearing canvas. You realize this isn't a company of soldiers. This is a wall of bullets. Every man is a machine gun 30 years before machine guns exist. And the mathematics are simple, brutal, final. You can't charge what you can't reach, and you can't reach men who can fire 48 rounds before you can fire 3. The Texas regiment breaks, not because they're cowards, not because they lack courage, but because human beings, no matter how brave, can't advance through fire that dense. Out, they retreat, they scatter, fall back to the Confederate lines in whatever order they can manage. Captain Smith's 52 men stand there, smoke pouring from their Henrys, brass casings glittering at their feet, and the supply depot remains secure. But the battle isn't over, not even close. The forward positions can't hold. Sears Mississippians have successfully flanked the right side. The 7th Illinois and 39th Iowa begin a fighting retreat toward the Star Fort, firing, moving back, firing again. Men are falling everywhere. The ground is, as one survivor wrote, covered with the dead and dying. They make it to the fort, barely. Colonel Rewrote, regimental commander, is wounded, but still directing the defense. The Confederates are right behind them. Now the real horror begins. Close-range combat, artillery firing canister shot, essentially giant shotgun shells, into human beings at 30 yards. Men shooting through gun forts, hand-to-hand fighting on the parapets. The Confederates attacked 4 times, 4 separate assaults, each time clawing their way up to the fort's earthen walls, each time driven back by the concentrated fire of the defenders. Private Frank Orcutt, that musician who fired 400 rounds, describes watching Confederate soldiers use a cabin near the fort as cover. He waits, watches a puff of smoke from a knothole where a rebel sharpshooter is firing, levels his Henry across the wheel of an artillery piece, waits for the next shot. When the smoke appears again, he fires. No more shots from the cabin. Later, when the Federals investigate, they find 2 bodies, one in the cabin, one behind a nearby tree, both hit in the head. Orcutt writes with Midwestern matter-of-factness, with a range inside of 60 yards and no distracting movements to interfere, it will readily be seen and recognized as no very skillful performance. But multiply that by 291 men. Multiply that by 16 rounds per rifle. Multiply that by hour after hour of sustained combat. The 7th Illinois alone fires over 31,000 rounds of ammunition during the battle. 31,000. The regiment's battle flag takes 217 bullet holes. The flagstaff is hit 11 times. Bina! By early afternoon, the Star Fort is running low on ammunition. The Confederates are running low on ammunition. General French received word that Union reinforcements are moving up the railroad. Brigadier General John Corse's signalmen have been in contact with Sherman's forces the entire time. After the fourth repulse, French makes a decision. His men have taken horrific casualties. Nearly 900 men gone, including 134 dead. The Federal position hasn't broken. Reinforcements are coming. He orders a withdrawal. By 2:30 p.m., the Confederates are pulling back. The battle is over. 707 Federal casualties, a third of the garrison. The 7th Illinois lost 35 taken out, 67 wounded, 35 missing. Company E, Captain Smith's company, took losses too, though Smith himself survived. The Confederates suffered nearly 900 casualties. The Texas regiment that faced Smith's 52 men, broken to fragments and practically annihilated. When General Sherman learned what happened at Allatoona Pass, he issued a general order on October 7th praising the defense. The railroad remained open. The supplies remained secure. The march to the sea would proceed as planned. But Sherman, practical-minded as always, noticed something else in the after-action reports. One regiment, the 7th Illinois, had done disproportionate damage with a weapon the War Department had barely purchased. The government bought only 1,731 Henrys during the entire war and issued them to just one cavalry unit. But individual soldiers and regiments who purchased their own were rewriting the tactical manual. Major William Ludlow, who witnessed the defense, wrote, "What saved us that day was the fact that we had a number of Henry rifles. When the artillery reopened, this company of 16 shooters sprang to the parapet and poured out such a multiplied, rapid, and deadly fire that no man could stay in front of it. No man could stay in front of it." That's the sentence that changes everything. For 3 years, Civil War battles had followed a predictable pattern. Lines of infantry trading volleys, charges, countercharges, close combat, victory to whoever had more men or better position or stronger will. Allatoona Pass demonstrated something new, something the military establishment wouldn't fully accept for another 50 years. That firepower, sustained, rapid, accurate firepower, could overcome numerical superiority. That technology could multiply force. One man with a Henry could do the work of 8 men with. Captain Smith's 52 men held off 400, and a regiment of 291 soldiers armed with repeating rifles held a position that should have required 1,000 defenders. The Confederates who faced the 7th Illinois that day knew something had changed. They just didn't have a name for it yet. Suppressive fire, superiority, what military theorists would later call the principle of overwhelming sustained firepower. All they knew was you couldn't charge it. You couldn't outrun it. You couldn't overcome it with courage or numbers or tactical skill. You could only retreat and wonder what kind of devil's weapon the Yankees had brought to Georgia. Within 2 years, the war would end. Winchester would buy the rights to the Henry design. The lever-action repeating rifle would become the gun that won the West. And a young Civil War veteran named John Browning would study Oliver Winchester's patents and think, what if we made it even better? But on October 5th, 1864, in a railroad cut through the Georgia mountain, 52 men with 16-shot rifles taught the world a lesson that's still being taught at military academies today. In war, mathematics beats bravery, firepower beats courage, and the soldier with the most rounds per minute goes home alive. The Henry rifle didn't just turn a Confederate charge into a wall of bodies, it turned the entire concept of infantry combat inside out, and wrote the first chapter of modern warfare in brass casings and rimfire smoke. Captain John Smith and his 52 men stood in the open that morning because they'd done the math. 16 rounds times 52 rifles equals 832 reasons why 400 brave men couldn't take another step forward. That's not a battle, that's arithmetic. Cold, brutal, final, and written in Georgia red clay.